The hangar was silent, until the unmistakable sound of boots hitting the floor echoed across the room. A full squadron of fighter pilots, men and women known for their unmatched arrogance and precision, suddenly snapped to attention. But they weren't saluting a general. They weren't even acknowledging a decorated war hero. They were standing for her. A grease-stained mechanic who had spent most of her life hidden behind engine parts, not cockpits. What had she done to command the respect of an entire jet squadron? The roar of jet engines was the sound of glory. For most people on base, that thunder in the sky symbolized speed, power, and the daring skill of the pilots who flew them. But for her, it was something different. To her, that sound wasn't just the machine's voice. It was a language. Every uneven vibration, every sputter, every subtle shift told a story, and she could read it better than anyone. She wasn't a pilot. She wasn't an officer. She was a mechanic, one of dozens who kept the squadron's birds alive. But while pilots were celebrated with medals, uniforms, and nicknames painted across fuselages, she was just the girl in coveralls. Her mornings started long before the squadron ever reached the flight line. While most of them were drinking coffee in briefing rooms, she was elbow-deep in grease, checking hydraulics, inspecting turbine blades, and crawling beneath fuselages with nothing but a flashlight and her intuition. She wasn't glamorous and she wasn't loud, but she was brilliant. The truth was, many of the pilots didn't even know her name. To them, mechanics were interchangeable, faceless ground crew who fixed problems so their jets could fly again. But she noticed them. She knew which pilot liked to slam on the throttle too soon. She knew whose landings put strain on the landing gear. And she knew, long before anyone else, which jet was about to fail. Her quiet warnings were often brushed off. "Don't worry about it," the pilots would say. "If the instruments say it's fine, it's fine." But she knew better. Machines had rhythms, patterns. And sometimes she could sense something wrong before a sensor ever picked it up. She didn't complain. She didn't argue. She just kept working. But that didn't mean it didn't sting. Watching the squadron strut across the hangar, being saluted, respected, and idolized, while she stayed invisible in the shadows, left a mark. Still, she told herself it didn't matter. She wasn't there for glory. She was there because she loved the aircraft. Because she understood them. Because someone had to keep them flying. What she didn't know was that soon, very soon, those same pilots who barely knew her name would be forced to see her differently. And when the moment came, when steel and fire tested everything she knew, the squadron wouldn't be looking at her like just a mechanic. They'd be standing at attention. It started like any other day, clear skies, the squadron scheduled for routine maneuvers. The hangar buzzed with the same rhythm she had grown used to. Pilots laughing, crew rushing, jets rumbling to life. Nothing unusual. Nothing that screamed disaster. But she felt it. As she ran her hands along the belly of one particular jet, a sleek fighter assigned to the squadron leader, something gnawed at her instincts. The diagnostics said everything was fine. The pressure gauges were within range. The pilot was already suited up, helmet tucked under his arm, impatient to launch. But she heard it. A faint rattle in the intake, almost imperceptible. Most would have ignored it. She couldn't. "Wait," she called out, wiping grease from her hands as she jogged toward him. "This one isn't ready." He barely looked at her. "We're on a tight clock. Don't ground my bird over a hunch." "It's not a hunch," she pushed, her voice firm. "There's something wrong with the compressor. If it fails midair..." "Listen." He cut her off, snapping down his visor. "I've flown this jet 100 times. If the system says it's good, it's good." And with that, he climbed in. The canopy sealed with a hiss. The engines screamed to life, drowning out her protests. She stood helplessly as the squadron roared down the runway, one by one, vanishing into the bright sky. For hours she paced. Her hands trembled, her mind replaying that rattle over and over. And then it happened. The radio crackled with a voice that should have sounded calm, but didn't. "Mayday. This is Falcon Lead. Engine failure. Losing altitude fast." Her blood ran cold. It was him, the squadron leader. the very jet she had tried to ground. Chaos erupted in the control room. Technicians scrambled, officers shouted into headsets, and screens lit up with erratic telemetry. The jet was plummeting. The ejection system was armed, but if it failed, a leader, a decorated pilot, could be gone in seconds. Her heart pounded. She wasn't supposed to be there. Mechanics didn't belong in mission control. But she pushed through the crowd anyway, eyes locked on the monitors. And then she saw it, the pattern in the data, the very failure she had warned about. "Bypass the auxiliary line," she shouted, louder than she ever thought possible. Heads turned, but she didn't care. "He's got 5 seconds before the compressor seizes completely. Reroute it manually." The room froze. Officers exchanged looks. Nobody moved. So she moved instead. Her hands flew over the console, punching in overrides most of them didn't even know existed. "Falcon lead, listen to me," she barked into the comms. "Switch to reserve flow now." For a heartbeat, silence. And then, "Copy that." A violent sputter shook the jet. Smoke trailed its wings. But the engine caught, sputtering, gasping, and finally stabilizing. Just enough for him to level out and limp back toward base. The hangar shook as the jet skidded onto the runway, sparks flying, metal groaning, but in one piece. The squadron leader climbed out, shaken, pale, but alive. And every eye in the room turned to her, the mechanic who had just saved their commander. The hangar was filled with smoke and the acrid sting of scorched metal. Mechanics swarmed the battered jet, extinguishers hissing, tools clattering as they scrambled to assess the damage. But the chaos around her felt muted, like the world had gone quiet after the storm. She stood frozen, her pulse still hammering from the seconds that had felt like an eternity. Her hands, smeared with grease and sweat, trembled faintly. She wasn't supposed to have done what she did. She wasn't supposed to override systems, bark commands to a squadron leader, or touch the mission consoles. By all rules, she had crossed a line. And yet, without her, he wouldn't be standing there. The squadron leader removed his helmet, his hair damp with sweat, his face pale but steady. He looked at her. Not past her, not through her, not like she was just another nameless wrench-turner. He looked at her. For a moment, silence stretched across the hangar. Dozens of pilots, crew members, and officers stood still, waiting for someone to speak. She half expected anger, reprimands, maybe even punishment. After all, mechanics didn't talk back to commanders. But instead, something she never imagined happened. The squadron leader straightened, squared his shoulders, and gave a sharp nod in her direction. And then he saluted. The sound of boots striking concrete echoed across the hangar as, one by one, the entire jet squadron stood at attention. Men and women who had flown combat missions, who carried themselves with pride and arrogance, now faced her with a respect they reserved for only the highest in command. Her breath caught in her throat. She had no words. For years, she had been invisible. Just the girl in coveralls, working in shadows while others basked in the spotlight. But in this moment, every eye was on her. Every ounce of respect she had silently earned but never received was finally given in a single, unified gesture. It wasn't about glory. It wasn't about rank. It was about something deeper, trust. The kind of trust that only comes when lives hang in the balance, and one person proves beyond doubt that they are the difference between life and death. As the salute held, her eyes burned with a mix of exhaustion and pride. She didn't need medals. She didn't need call signs painted on fuselages. For the first time, she knew exactly who she was, and so did they. Not just a mechanic, not just background noise. She was the reason they were alive. And from that day forward, no one would ever look at her the same way again.